technology. Peter Shaw, nuclear scientist, is here to talk about all of this with us. Peter, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Now, you have worked in nuclear technology since 1980.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about what you did, what your experience is.
I worked for Rocky Flats doing nuclear triggers for nuclear warheads. I worked in the power industry, working at cleaning up the piping and lowering the radiation exposures to the personnel there. I've worked in the nuclear navy for defueling. Most people don't know that all of our nuclear navy, all the fuel, will be defueled in Idaho where I work. And it's stored in canisters. I've also worked in a little bit on nuclear medicine. There's a reactor we have in Idaho that works on a special kind of brain cancer. And so we worked on that. And then I worked for my master's. I did analysis of various environmental samples where we can activate them with neutrons and maintain the sample to do something else. And we can have the sample tell us all that's in it just by its radioactive signature.
Wow. So when you talk to people about your work, do you find that they just kind of go glassy?
Yes, yes. Especially when I worked at Rocky Flats. It was one of the controversies, of course, is nuclear weapons, but a lot of people seem to have just a fear of radiation, not knowing that they're sitting in a sea of it. In fact, I like to tell people that they get radiation from their spouse every night. We're always irradiating each other. We have radiation in our bodies. In fact, one of the main radioactive substances we have is potassium. So bananas are radioactive. Anytime you have potassium tablets, it's just naturally radioactive.
Wow, bananas. I had no idea.
And peanut butter.
And peanut butter. Yes. Oh, man, peanut butter and banana. That's a good combo.
Yeah.
My goodness. Okay, so, I mean, it's a really interesting thing to talk about, I think, partly because it's so little understood. How much of a grasp of nuclear capability and like the truth of nuclear technology do you think the general public has?
I think it's very low because it's got a stigma that's outside the science. When you've been in the science as long as I have, it's pretty fantastic science because you can have elements tell you what's there by a radioactive signature, and the fact that we're in a sea of radiation, there's lots of things we can do with it. We can do medical, almost all of your medical tests are radioactive. For example, most people don't know that when you have a heart stress test, that's a lot of radioactive substance that they use. But they can scan your heart. So the benefits of seeing what your heart's doing are way outweigh the small amounts of radiation that you can have.
And it's also obviously applicable to power generation, and nuclear power technology has, you know, well, it's powerful, literally. I mean, it can, for a relatively small footprint, can produce a lot of power, which is why it was very appealing in Europe in particular, but not as much in America.
One of the big things that people don't understand is that the life cycle safety is the main consideration in an energy source. From cradle to grave, how many lives are you saving, or how many lives does it cost you to generate that power? And the thing about nuclear that's really hard to comprehend is how compact and dense it is. For example, a truckload of uranium fuel is like 38, I think, thousands of a train load of coal. So that density means that everything is safer. There's less transportation costs, less construction costs. You're getting more kilowatts for your human input. And by far, radioactive technology is the least amount of human damage for environmentally, safety, operationally than any technology, including solar and wind, because they are so diffuse. If they're diffuse, you have lots of material, lots of transportation, and you have the normal dangers of doing anything in life.
Now, nuclear, for lack of a better term, has very bad PR. And I think, you know, the thing that you see about solar and wind technologies, it's kind of hard to demonize those, but nuclear gets kind of, you know, included in a conversation about the dangers of nuclear technology. Right. And it's like you can't separate those two things. So how safe from a scientific perspective is nuclear power, truly?
Well, I think that when I mentioned the peanut butter to you example, I use that example because that's the amount of radiation you would get living right next to a nuclear power plant. You get the radiation of eating a peanut butter sandwich. The levels are so low that it's hard to put them in perspective because people just hear radiation, but they don't realize that they're living in a sea of it. The unit we use for radiation is millirems, so just think of the numbers, don't worry about it. You live in about 300 millirems of radiation a year. That's from all sources. You're getting, if you live right next to a nuclear power plant, you would get 0.01%, say, some really minute number. And those numbers are so non-existent that for some reason people they think that radiation is going to affect them when their bodies have lived in it their entire lives. And that's the important thing, is that radiation is not a new thing to humans. We live in it, we dwell in it. In fact, one of the things that's problematic is when you have an energy sealed home and you have a lot of natural material, you have increased the radiation dose in your home because of radon. The biggest source of radioactive exposure is radon now. And they found that just recently. They had to up the normal background. So in this huge background, you're talking very, very minute amounts. So it's so safe that people often don't believe you because they think nuclear power means radiation. For example, a coal power plant has way more radiation than a nuclear power because it's got material from the ground. When you do anything with rock or soil, you're dealing with radioactive substances. When you take a plane flight, you get, my son-in-law is a pilot. He gets more radiation flying in 1 year than I got in my entire career, because every time you go up in a plane, you're getting 1 or 2 millirems of radiation.
Now, we've got obviously radiation all around us, and we know that, obviously at super low levels, not harmful, but there is a point at which it does become dangerous, and I think this is the point that people focus on a lot when you think about the most high-profile issues that we've seen, like Fukushima, like Chernobyl, like 3 Mile Island, and I think that that's what comes to mind. They worry about the potential of the worst-case scenario. So what do you say to people who say, I just don't trust it? If this disaster could happen, if it's all in the realm of possibility, I don't trust it.
Right. I think, but the difficulty is that there's no such thing as doing anything that's risk-free. And we like to talk in risk in terms of the probability of an occurrence, that's how frequent it would happen, and then severity. So every time you hear about risk, we all should think, what's the probability of that occurring, and then what's the severity when it does occur? And in nuclear technology, from the start, those have been the main consideration. And one of the difficulties is that no other technology has been this cautious about implementation. We've never worried about that. For example, I show pictures of old gold mining, gold mining in Carson, say. Nobody worried about the long-term consequences, the toxicity, or the danger. They just did it. Well, nuclear accidents are highly, highly improbable. And contrary to most opinions, most of them are not that severe because of all the safety measures that have been implemented. The other fact is that the modern nuclear technology is so much better than what we have going that would make the safety even better than better. So nuclear technology has been way safer than we ever thought. We were looking at an accident every other year. We haven't had any, except for 3 Mile Island, which was actually very minor. And so we've proven ourselves over time, but somehow that record has not gotten across because of that image of severity. But the chances of it happening are almost non-existent. It'd be like worrying about getting hit by lightning 3 times or something. Whereas when you drive to work, that's your most dangerous thing. And you don't think about that because it's pretty probable, but it's something you live with.
Now, here in Nevada, it's like here's your Nevada card, and with that Nevada card comes a hatred of the idea of Yucca Mountain. It is a bipartisan hatred that everyone here has, pretty much. So the question I have for you is, I mean, you're a proponent of nuclear technology. Are you a proponent of Yucca Mountain?
Yes.
And then, so why? Change Nevada's mind.
Yeah. I think that the main thing that we need to understand, again, with nuclear technology, we have handled the waste from the beginning. We've contained it. Instead of, for example, a coal plant will just spew it in the atmosphere. Nobody knows what they do with the ash. Nobody cared. Most of the other technologies aren't considered of their waste. We just assume where it goes somewhere. But nuclear technology, we've always contained the waste. And one thing about nuclear is it's so concentrated that the amount of waste is actually very small. Your contribution for taking part of nuclear energy is something like a little aspirin tablet worth of waste for the amount of electricity used. So we're getting a lot of electricity for a really little amount of waste, and we're not putting it in the atmosphere. We're containing it. Now, the other thing about waste is that there has to be a vector. A lot of people don't realize, for example, I could say that there's enough safety pins, enough pins, straight pins made in America to kill everybody. And you'd say, well, how's that? Well, if I position them in everybody's heart, I could kill everybody. But that's the vector to transmit that danger is non-existent. And with nuclear technology, there's no way to get any of that toxicity to anybody's lungs. Now, there's two ways to get, you can get irradiated like you do with an X-ray, and a lot of people don't realize that when you get an X-ray, you're not radioactive. So I used to joke that, I used to joke with people, I don't need a refrigerator light because I just open it up and glow. But the point is, you don't get irradiated from an X-ray. But you can get particulates, and that's the ingestion pathway. And that's the main thing we think about with nuclear fuel. So nuclear has always had what we call defense in depth, which means we take the worst scenario and then we have several layers of protection. So your nuclear waste that goes to Yucca Mountain is sealed in a steel canister. I've actually watched that done for my naval waste that I've handled. And then you weld that, you test that weld, and then you seal it in another canister, and then you put that canister in a giant cement structure, and that's called monitored retrievable storage. And you store that as long as you want. And then you can take that at any time and take it to your repository. And then you have a salt mine, which is intrinsically sealed. And the reason you use a salt mine is because by definition, there's not been any water there for thousands of years, because it's salt. Otherwise, the salt wouldn't be there. So you've got all those layers of defense. And at the end of it all, there's no vector to get any of that. Should any of these fail, you still can't get it to a human being because there's no vector. And you've got to have the vector to have it affect a human being.
Now, the big concern that people have, though, is not necessarily the storage in the mountain, but getting there. The transportation path pretty much has to take it through some of our main population hubs, and people are really concerned about that. So, worst case scenario, because I know that these containers are very, very strong and secure, but just let's go crazy here and imagine that there's a massive earthquake or a plane crash or something happens. What's the worst case scenario, and then what happens to people?
Well, I don't know if you've seen, I got to watch some of the videos. This was like 30 years ago in the beginning of my career, the kind of testing they do to handle that worst case scenario, i.e., what if two trucks with spent fuel collide? The first thing we got to remember is that a lot of the waste is not spent fuel. The spent fuel is the main thing we're worried about. But the canisters are made to handle the worst accidents we can think. You can see pictures on the internet if you'd like about a train going 60 miles an hour and having the canister fly off the train and go right into a solid wall. And these containers they're built to withstand huge drops. So, and again, even if the canister breaks open, there is no vector because it's a solid. Solids don't get into your lungs. They have to vaporize. It's not like you've got a liquid, for example. We don't transport liquid. And so even if the fuel was just sitting in the open, as long as there's no particulates coming off. It's hard for people to realize that all that radiation dissipates within several meters. I mean, I actually worked around 3 Mile Island, the actual spent fuel, and it was screaming where I was touching it, but 3 meters away, it was down to nothing because it decreases as the square of the distance. It's like sound. When you get twice away, you have a fourth of the sound. Same way with radiation.
Interesting. I mean, there's a lot of stuff here that I think probably a lot of people don't know. It's very interesting. We're about out of time, but what takeaway would you want people to have about this? What message about considering this technology or further research?
I would like people to understand that radiological science is beneficial for power because it's been studied so much. We have taken much more care in handling our waste, handling our product, and in worker safety. A lot of people don't realize that if you do any kind of power, like solar or wind, you have lots of workers running around, climbing up. So you have a worker safety problem. And after all is said and done from cradle to grave, nuclear safety has the least amount of lives for the most amount of kilowatts. So if you want to generate electricity, and for example, if you don't want to have any CO2, we're our technology. We always can do that because it's been from the inception that we will not harm people and we'll take extra care to keep our risks down to zero. So it's a safety, there's no other technology that has that kind of safety record. And as you pointed out, there's no other technology that doesn't seem to get much credit for that safety record.
Yeah, definitely you don't hear about it talked about in the clean energy conversation. Right. All right, we are out of time. But Peter, thank you so much for your time. I sure appreciate it.
I appreciate it.
Well, that is it for this episode of Face the State. But for more information or to see past episodes, you can send to our website. That's ktvn.com. Thank you so much for being with us. We'll see you next week.